Welcome to our CEO to CEO chat today, where we will be discussing cybersecurity trends and assessments that MSPs can take to the bank. I am your host, Allison Rusk, Head of Marketing for INKY. And before we get started with Vince and Dave, I'd like to encourage you to participate in the discussion today. The Q&A chat will be open throughout the webinar, so please type in your questions for us at any time. You can also upvote questions that you like by clicking on the thumbs up icon. We will answer your questions live at the end of the chat. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Vince Mazza, CEO of GuardStreet, and we have Dave Baggett, founder and CEO of INKY. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi, Allison.
Thanks.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, you guys. So I think I'll hand it over to Dave to kick off the Q&A and the chat today.
Yeah, this will be a really interesting one because, what we'll learn today is Vince has a pretty different model from a lot of our partners. So if I can indulge you a bit, I'll interview you first. I'd like to hear about your approach to solving cybersecurity issues for your customers, because it's not what we typically see with our partners. It's a little different, and I find it really intriguing. So could you sort of give us a high-level bird's eye view of how you think about it and how you guys operate?
Absolutely. So maybe to start, GuardStreet, by the way, thank you very much. GuardStreet, we're a holistic cyber company. So really what we focus on is the proactive side of cybersecurity. We also handle the reactive side of things, but we're not an MSP and we stay in our lane. And kind of sticking with that proactive approach, I would say, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Will Ferrell. I'm sorry to bring him up so early in the segment, but I think I like to look at our approach as cybersecurity with more cowbell. So, sorry, I had to do it. Allison, you invited me to this.
I thought you were going to bring up ELP.
But there's the best approach, the best practice for working with clients is to use a quantified risk assessment, which is what we do. And it turns out that it really uncovers the most from a risk perspective, but also then being able to quantify it and use it as a management tool is the way to go. And that turns out from an MSP and selling perspective to be an absolute best practice of selling with credibility. And so if you will indulge, I'll bring you through the process that
Please,
we go through with new and even existing clients. It really is a completely dedicated, customized approach based on the NIST framework, where we'll look at a company based on its size, the industry category that it's in. We'll look at attack trends within a particular industry, and then we'll use an objective formula that will quantify the risk to the annualized loss expectancy, which is an insurance term. Actuaries use that. And the engagement and I'll bring you through the engagement in just a moment, but it's an engagement where we're really working with all of the functional areas, the key functional areas within an organization. And the MSP is part of that, has to be, because that's the IT function. And so it's a 10-step process that we bring companies through. I won't bring you through all 10, but we start with the assets. So basically looking at the crown jewels of the organization. What items for an organization, if they lost access to, that would cause the most pain for the organization. We then look at the threat actors, which are typically external, but you do not rule out internal threat actors, as we all know in the cyberspace. We'll then look at the attack trends based on, and of course the controls that are in place. And then we'll look at the attack trends and assign a probability. With that information, we'll then apply an objective formula. And the output of this process is reports that anybody can understand, any department, not just the technical IT folks or financial side of things. It's anybody, HR, marketing, and so forth. And we'll provide the decision maker with the decision tools and the management tools that they need to plan out their cybersecurity. So what they'll get is a risk assessment based on that annualized loss expectancy for the company. Will then also provide a strategy, and that strategy will be ranked based on the annualized loss expectancy. So if you implement a particular control, which may or may not cost money, by the way, then at that point, you've basically reduced your annualized loss expectancy. We'll provide a cost benefit so that then you can look at what you need to focus on, but also assign the cost, and that applies time too, because you've got a budget for your strategy. And then finally, it's an executive summary. So from an MSP perspective of bringing us as the independent cybersecurity company in there, we basically provide the client with everything they could need to make a decision and go forward. And of course, a key insight from that is the MSP is the one that implements everything. So it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving from that perspective. And then the other thing is that, listen, 90+% of cyber attacks originate from email. It's a fact, And so, from an email perspective, that tends to float to the top within the strategy output. So long answer to a short question, but that's our process that we bring clients through.
That's great. I mean, I, as an engineer, love the quantified approach, and I can only imagine how helpful it is when you're trying to convince someone they need to put something in place, especially if that something costs some money, right? You can quantify the risk for them, and you can quantify the mitigation of it. If I could ask one question, so we all know about these compliance regimes like SOC 2, and you mentioned NIST. I think a lot of us sort of view those as like a giant list of check boxes, but
yes,
we struggle to capture what does that mean in terms of risk mitigation for companies. How do you think about those frameworks? Obviously, you must derive your quantified view in some form from those guidelines, right? But how does that work?
Absolutely. So, and I'm going to start by answering that compliance doesn't necessarily mean cybersecurity, that a company is necessarily secure. They could follow the check boxes, but that doesn't actually necessarily correlate into them following the practices that are required. Part of our business is, look, we've got 4 service areas. One is the advisory. So we help companies to become compliant through risk assessments. And what we find, whether it's a SOC, ISO, CMMC, or PCI, that the requirements are quite similar and often just ranked differently and have a different focus, but they're very related. But we've got to be very detail oriented in terms of going through the gap assessments there. And I will say, going through those assessments with the different frameworks aren't always quantified. So that we like the quantified approach, because now you're not just checking the boxes. You're actually, you want to reduce your risk, and that comes from practicing certain controls as well.
That's what I love about this quantified approach. And you mentioned email. Obviously, we are at INKY focused on email security, especially phishing. And we hear, I would say, 2 things from MSPs really clearly. One is they need world-class protection, particularly from email, but across the whole board.
Yep.
They can't use a substandard solution. They cannot have their customers get breached. That's a huge concern for them. And the other is they're always having to focus on profitability and margin. I guess what advice would you give on those 2 points?
Well, you've got to sell from the perspective of objectivity and credibility, but you've got to be a solution seller. An MSP that comes in and well, this is what I have to sell, so consequently, that's what you need. That's not the approach. That's not, you've got to look at the relationship with the client and play the long game. That's better for everybody. And when I say play the long game, that means when the client, you've got to identify properly, what controls the client needs to put in place. I'm going to take some INKY examples here because we love INKY.
Please.
And we offer INKY, and we encourage our MSPs to offer INKY because it's simply the best solution out there. I truly mean it from the perspective of working with other solutions, and we'll cover that stuff later. But you've got to, like, let's look at an accounting department as an example. Because we've gone through, we have the emergency side of our business. We've gone through a fair amount of attacks there. And focusing on that department is very important. The INKY Fish Fence does the blocking and tackling there, but there's a lot of impersonation attempts that focus there. But at the same time, let's say that an account is compromised, and we've seen a scenario where the bad guy will compromise an email account and send clients new ACH information. So in that scenario, for an accounting department, you can't not have the outbound protection. So you start in one area, but as you get to learn your client and play that long game, you find other solutions that they clearly need to protect themselves. But now I'm going to go from a compliance perspective. Let's stick with the accounting side of things. If you look at this year, the FTC safeguards rule came out, and there's a whole lot of requirements in there for a CPA firm. Those types of firms also need to have some form of encryption when they're sending sensitive documentation. So the DLP aspect and the other aspects of INKY are particularly important, including the encryption.
I ask everybody I interview this, what keeps you up at night?
Oh man, I would say beyond the loud neighbors, and half kidding about that, or kids. But it's the same things that keep me working hard and our team every day. And I look at that from two perspectives. We're a boutique. Our focus is a white glove treatment with our clients. We find solutions. We're not a cookie cutter organization. Never will be. And so we get to know the companies and the people at the companies quite well, and as we're working with them over the years. And as much as I can't stand the emergencies, they happen in the world of cybersecurity, and I can't stand to see my friends and people I know go through an attack. It's such a distraction, not only at work, but they bring it home. Sometimes they're working 24/7 to clean things up. So I can't stand to see people go through that, especially if it could be avoided. But then on the technical side of things, what keeps me up there is, if we've done a fair amount of research for a client, because there is a problem, there is a cyber problem, and here is the best way to solve that. And we provide the recommendation, and then they sit on the ticking time bomb and don't do anything. That keeps me up at night. Or if they take actions and don't consider cybersecurity. These days, you can't run a business without looking at cybersecurity from all angles. And so if they make an acquisition and they don't consider the cyber side of things, or just move offices, and don't consider those types of things, that keeps us up at night.
One of the things that has really struck me in my time in cybersecurity, which is coming on 10 years now,
You're looking good for 10 years.
It's given me a certain amount of, I wouldn't say gray hair, but getting there.
I used to have hair before I went into this industry, so
it's the thing that strikes me as really kind of amazing is just how smart and clever some of these attackers are. I mean, these guys know everything about Unicode, CSS, HTML. They know how all the incumbent mail protection systems work, and that just fascinates me. I don't, it's hard to be impressed by people who are evil, but at some
Yeah.
level you kind of have to admire their creativity. uh,
Well, even, yes, the from the technical aspect, they're very intelligent people. And it's been interesting to see how those very intelligent people set up their corporations,
mhm.
and with ransomware as a service, or cybercrime as a service. It's just unbelievable what they're doing. So they can be the back office for the not so smart attacker,
Yep.
and you just basically source to the bad guy operation, and just hit it hard. So
I
that's
always imagine there's a Walter White type figure out there who's coming up with all these new techniques and then, weaponizing them and then selling them on the dark web. And then all the crypt kiddies can use them by downloading them. I mean, we actually try to take a different approach from other mail security vendors in that whenever we see a new tactic, I mean, obviously we try to block everything, but everybody knows that's impossible. Even humans can't do this perfectly. But we try to make protections that generalize to new examples. So imagine a mail that is purporting to be from some brand that the intended victim user will recognize. One way to deal with that, we want INKY to recognize what brand it is. One way to deal with that is we could just have a giant list of Microsoft mails that we know are valid and see, is it one of those? That doesn't generalize to new examples, though. So instead, we've taken a deeper approach of saying, we're going to render the mail, we're going to analyze it, look at all the imagery in the mail and all the text, and try to mimic the human's ability to recognize brand in the mail. And that we can now do at human levels of accuracy for over 300 brands, which means that when the attackers start sending some new fake Microsoft mail, we don't have to change the code. The code's like, oh, just like a person. Like if I give you a mail you haven't seen before and it's looks like it's from Microsoft, you're going to say in 1 second, oh, it's Microsoft, right? But there are always things that we haven't anticipated, even within that rubric of trying to do solutions that generalize to new examples. And so we have a data team that looks at fish that are reported by end users. Now, most of our customers allow our data team to see reported fish. That's not required, but most do. And when they allow that, we actually look at them and understand, well, what's the mechanism by which this fish is working, especially if it got through. If it got through INKY, why did we not catch this?
right.
And so we're constantly seeing this whole range of new tactics. And we actually write about these and publish about them. One recently was QR codes in email. So we started seeing emails where there wouldn't be a bad link in the mail. Now, in the past, we've seen cases where the attacker would put a link to OneDrive and the bad link would be in OneDrive. So we've seen that for a few years. This is a different way of hiding a link. They just put the link in a QR code, and often it looks like it's a mail from some trusted authenticator like Microsoft.
Right.
And then they scan the QR code, and that's the bad URL. And, when we started seeing these, we realized, oh, that never occurred to us. We better go put code in our system to process QR codes and analyze them. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is our cycle time on this kind of thing. I mean, we have probably one of these every month or two, a new tactic. In that case, we got code from, recognizing this was a new tactic into production in like 2 weeks. And I don't know that anybody else in the industry has QR code scanning yet, even months later in their products. So
I haven't come across it yet, and we're constantly reviewing, what's out there. You guys have been at the top.
It's funny because we'll get people who are reviewing various solutions and we're in a bake-off or something. And it'll come up, do you guys do anything about QR codes? Like, yeah, we're the ones who published about QR codes, and we've had countermeasures in our system for like 2 months of QR codes. So but that's the kind of thing that's, I don't want to say it's fun, but it certainly keeps it interesting that these guys are so clever that they keep coming up with more and more And you'd like to think we could imagine everything they're going to do, but it's just impossible, right? So, but again, we try not to do something that's just responsive to a specific attack. We try to do something that generalizes. So instead of trying to recognize that specific phishing campaign with QR codes, we actually embedded in our product QR code scanning. The product actually identifies QR codes in every mail that has them, and then parses them out into what the QR code encodes. So, it's a very different, I think, way of working than a lot of our competitors take, from what I hear, at least.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I can tell you the answer is yeah. That is the case. I hate to say it like this, but we kissed a lot of frogs before we met the folks at INKY. I would have never correlated INKY into being a one-trick pony like some of the competitors are. I just don't see them innovating. I haven't seen them innovating like you guys have been. Even something simple, like I'm going to go back to the quantified risk assessment for just a moment. Two of the things that rise to the top, I mentioned email is one of them, but training is the other. And the fact that, listen, we eat our own dog food here at Guard Street. We use INKY. We see it firsthand. And just the warning messages with the extended description from a training perspective. You talk about changing behaviors. That has been just a great aspect of INKY. But beyond that, I know there are several other features that we use with INKY, but you guys are innovating all the time. Can you tell me a little bit about what we should know beyond the QR codes? What other things do you have out there and coming out?
Yeah, so one of the other tactics we saw recently, which I was pretty impressed with, we saw a wave of attacks that would send somebody to a fake Microsoft login page, which of course was credential harvesting.
Yep.
And we've seen those for 5-10 years, right? This was new and interesting though, because we saw one that was targeting us, and it came up with the login box superimposed over what looked like an INKY webpage. We're like, there's no way we're big enough that somebody targeted us specifically. How is this working? And then we saw another example where somebody was sent to starbucks.com with a fake login page, and it was sent to, brand impersonating Starbucks. And we realized, oh, what they're doing is they're embedding the target brand, the victim company's website, under their fake login page just by putting it in an iframe. So it's stupidly simple, but so genius, because now if you're, an employee of one of these companies, you're an INKY.com employee, you get this mail, you go to this page and you're like, well, that's my page. It must be legitimate, right? So that's an example of something where, again, recent development that is remarkably clever, incredibly easy, requires no labor. And think about it from their standpoint, right? They too can now generalize to new domains. They can attack anybody, anybody who has a website. You just put that as a query parameter in the URL, and their server goes and puts an iframe in and says, like, I'm going to use the victim company's website. So that's an example. In terms of what we're doing as countermeasures, we're constantly looking at, again, these kinds of things, and often they do coalesce into new kinds of fish. So an example that probably started maybe even a year ago now was you've won a Makita drill. There, you get these mails that say, great, you won a Makita drill, just go in here to get your gift. We saw so many of those, and there were lots of variations that we essentially made a dedicated model just to recognize those. And this is where the INKY banner comes in too. Now, because we added that model, we have a banner message, prize scam, surveyor prize scam, right? Because once the model detects that, it can now say to the user, this is a prize or a gift scam. Now, often if those things are clearly identified, they just go to quarantine. But there are these middle cases where we might put a yellow banner on it and say, look, we're not sure this is an Amazon, but it sure doesn't look like Amazon. It didn't come from an Amazon domain. You probably didn't win a gift card from Amazon. It's probably not really Amazon, right? So that's an example of where we have to go and collect a bunch of examples of a new sort of phishing campaign, and then essentially turn them into a new dedicated machine learning model to recognize, again, in a way that generalizes to new ones we haven't seen.
I was going to
come up
ask
with.
Dave, I was going to ask you about that because you know, in the warning messages that we receive, I mean, I'm an XGE guy, so I'm a Six Sigma, you know, believer. And you know, they're almost always spot on. And once in a while we'll get that yellow one. It's like, okay, yeah, that one is a phishing. So do you guys take that? Tell me about how you take that data, maybe aggregate it, and then refine it so it improves the accuracy, because you're pretty buttoned up in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, one really helpful aspect, again, is this reporting function where we embed our banner, and it's just essentially part of the mail, so it doesn't require a plugin or anything. It's just at the top of the mail, and then we put a link below there. You've seen this, report this mail link.
Yep.
And that creates a feedback loop where users can report, hey, you know, this is actually safe, or they can report this is spam or gray mail, I don't want it. They can self-serve blocking it if they want, but they can say, I think it's phishing. Now, that doesn't involve any human interaction on the MSP's part. It's all automated. They can see it if they want, but they don't have to. But we tend to review those. So we don't review all of them, but we review a lot of them. And that gives us a source of examples, and we can create a corpus, what we call a corpus of examples of, okay, it's another prize scam, you know, put it in the hopper labeled prize scam. And that's data from which we can develop a machine learning model that recognizes those things. And sometimes that's a statistical model, and sometimes it's literally just we use heuristics that we know are going to work, like write code that will identify these things. And we've gotten the cycle time down so we can develop those and put them in the product and push them out to production reliably really quickly now. Another example of one we did a while ago was Bitcoin extortion scam.
Oh, that's
so the ones where you
these
get
days.
this thing and it has all this gibberish text and says, you know, you got to pay me Bitcoin. While we could just say, like most other systems, hey, that's bad, it's red, go to quarantine, we actually like to give a more refined analysis. It's actually not just a bad mail. It's also happens to be a cryptocurrency extortion scam. And then that's reflected in the dashboard that the MSPs can use. They can search for, well, what are the kinds of threats that are targeting me, my stable of customers? And for this customer, what kind of scams are targeting accounting, for example, like you mentioned? And then it's broken down into all those categories. And this whole idea of the banner, it started out as, like everybody else, we saw this external tag that people were using. Hey, this mail's external. This is probably 7 years ago, right? We thought that's a good idea.
And everybody
but unfortunately,
ignores it now.
It's kind of useless because, and why is it useless? It's useless. We identified 2 reasons why it's useless, and we've proven this empirically over time. The first reason it's useless is it goes on every external mail. That's too frequent. If you put something on 90% of mails, people will become blind to it. So we make sure we actually measure the percentage of mails that we put yellows on, and we keep that within a band of maybe 7.5% to a very high of 15%, usually 7.5% to 12%. That means that people will not become blind to it. It's empirical fact. The other thing, though, we recognize was useless about external is, what does that tell the user to do? So this is external. So what? What does that mean for me and the end user? So the other thing we found is you need to be precise about what's potentially problematic about the mail, and you need to use really clear, simple language. And if you do those things, then users start to recognize, hey, this thing's actually useful.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to listen to it now. But that's taken us literally years to evolve those categories. We probably have 70, 75 categories now, and also the language behind them.
Dave, you guys have refined it in a way that it's correlating to dollars. And I'm just going to give an example. There's a client that we started with last year. They had been, their accounting area had been attacked. They're always being attacked, but they were compromised like every year for years before. And the MSP that we were working with, we put our heads together. You know what? Let's put something in place. They have this other email security. I'm not even going to mention the name of the company, but we used to work with them too. Let's just put something together that focuses in on the accounting area. We put INKY in place. Okay, we put INKY in place. The blocking and tackling was there. It helped significantly. The company did not want to invest in training of their employees, which is a big mistake, and that's a whole nother webinar, my friend. But what we found is that the attacks, they kept coming, but the compromises stopped. And the folks in that accounting area were becoming, more educated to the attacker scenarios and doing the right things. And so that here's where I'm going with the correlating to dollars. The ownership of the company saw the great work that was, in place with the accounting area. Okay, the renewal came up for the other email security company. Out with the old, in with INKY. And it really worked out by starting even with a department and then demonstrating the case and then expanding it. And one of the things that we found was tremendously helpful. We do an annual INKY impact review call. And we pull, I don't even know if you knew about this one, Dave.
I don't think I knew about this.
You actually have some good people, really good people working for you, Sarah and Vin. Fantastic. Can't say enough good things about them, but we'll pull them in to a call and we'll go into that portal that is tremendously user-friendly that you guys have created for MSPs. And we will show the team, well, here's what we're seeing, to spend the time and it's and walk through with the client. Here's how you've been protected. Here's and if there's any calibration that needs to be done, we do it at that point in time. And then it just makes adding more email secure, other services, encryption as an example, or other aspects, that much easier. And the combination of the reduction in compromises to a key department where they've lost a bunch of money in the past, and that review got us the rest of the company with INKY. So what you guys have put together correlates into dollars for companies like us and our MSP partners. So
it's one thing that I think as a company, we're really fortunate because the banners and the dashboard and that sort of analytical approach, sort of like your quantified approach in general, makes it very easy for us to show value and our MSP customers to show value. All of our partners can show value readily. And in some sense, like the fact that the banner's there means it's in the user's face every day. This thing's helping you. Whereas a lot of cybersecurity products, nothing wrong with them. It's just not obvious to users. How is this helping me, or what's this doing for me? So I think one advantage of INKY and the banners is that it makes it clear this thing's doing something helpful for you. And then when you buttress that with showing them, oh, and by the way, here's 150 horribly nasty fish that targeted your users that didn't get through. Okay, well then I'm renewing, right?
Yeah, right. Oh, that helps.
It makes it easy to make that case.
So I want to ask you a question philosophically, because I'm seeing it, having worked with you guys over the years. But what's your approach to working with new MSPs and getting them set up and training and support? Talk to me about how you make the sausage, in that regard.
Yeah, so we're pretty low pressure, but also pretty blunt. So we try to address what we know the MSP or partners' concerns are. So a couple things we've heard. One is, as I said, I'm too freaking busy to micromanage your stuff, right? I need set it and forget it. Now, unfortunately, historically, most email protection systems have been anything but set it and forget it.
Yep.
But we've put a lot of work into making it pretty much set it and forget it after the first initial setup period. I think that's a huge value when you make it really clear. Like when you use this thing, it's going to protect your stable of customers. You're not going to be messing around with this thing all the time. Similarly, the fact that when users can report a mail, they can say, I don't want this. I'm going to block this domain I don't want any mail from this domain anymore. I'm going to block it for myself. That eliminates them going to you, the MSP, and saying, can you please block this? Right? All this sort of back and forth about email is gone. So we emphasize really bluntly, hey, this is going to save you a ton of time. If you're used to using other systems, this is a whole different kind of thing. Similarly, onboarding, we now have an automated tool where we can give the partner the ability to onboard customers and generate license keys without even involving us. Now, obviously, we're involved at the billing stage, but they don't have to go through us to onboard. They can just completely do it. And we actually have a new generation of that tool coming out that'll make it even less friction. That's another thing we hear all the time from partners is, I cannot believe that there are other solutions where it takes me 2 weeks to interact with them. I got to like do some manual onboarding thing. I got to talk to the vendor. I don't want to talk to vendors. And
Well, I'm
you know,
gonna
and the,
stop
and
you
the
there for just a second, Dave. Continue on that point, but
yeah,
we had an experience last week. One of our MSP partners, we needed to talk to or send something to INKY.
mhm.
Your support, it was minutes. The question and just the responsiveness of what you've got in the back there is pretty terrific. So
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm glad to hear that. It's something we emphasize, and it's something that again, our partners value a lot. Like literally they'll say, we want you to answer the phone when we pick up the phone. And we're like, isn't that kind of what everyone does? And they're like, no, not everyone does that. And so for us, it's really important to be there. And I think that's, you know, to be fair to the big incumbents, it's harder to do that when you're a giant mega corporation, right? We're
and
still
they don't,
relatively small.
right?
But, you know, I think in the same way that if you ask Amazon employees how they feel about customer success and customer service, they would tell you, yeah, we invested a lot more in that. We put a lot more effort into it than was normal for the industry. And that made us the biggest retailer in the world. Like, I think they would say that's the key. So I sort of view it as the same way, where it makes our costs a bit higher than some of our peer companies to do that. But it pays, like you say, in the terms of the long game, it pays massive dividends. And you know, and the other thing is that we've tried to become over the last 2 years. You mentioned point solution. We actually were a point solution 3 years ago, right? We just did inbound mail protection. In the last couple of years, we've added 7 different what we call SKUs, and we bundle them all different ways. And MSPs and partners can come to us and do a la carte bundling, custom bundles. So now we cover basically everything in the email space, and not even just security. But now we're starting to get into some productivity features like, you know, automatic gray mail filtering into a gray mail folder. We have compliance features like you can put now there's a signature function you can add where you can put a compliance footer on, or the marketing people like Allison can add a footer saying, hey, check us out at the, you know, next show. So we've tried to do to check all of these areas, do a competitive product, and try to do something innovative in each of these areas to become a one-stop shop for partners to cover all the email related stuff.
Don't stop.
So that's the other big thing that
great.
we've done. I mean, it's been a big emphasis for us, right? To exactly go from being that point solution to being the one-stop shop, at least within email.
Yep. Awesome.
So maybe we should take some questions from the
Yeah.
audience. You ready? Let's see if we have any. Allison, can you
Yes.
check this? I think we
Yeah.
got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so I got one via email, so I'll go with that one first. It's to you, Vince.
Oh.
Your qualitative risk assessments, are they really only meant for large companies, or like, is there a certain vertical you guys focus on?
Yeah, thank you for the question. No, it's not just targeted for big companies. We do work with some big brands, of course, but our sweet spot is in that small to mid-size arena, which INKY's perfect for. You guys are great for the big ones too, but the quantified risk assessment can be, again, it's customized, so it can be structured to any company size, and it's an affordable approach. It's which is based on the size and the amount of stuff that a company has. So it's pretty flexible.
Okay, thanks, Vince.
Thank you for the question.
Another question is to you as well, Vince. In addition to email security, are there other key controls that resonate from Guardstreet's risk assessment?
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you look at proper cyber hygiene, which email protection is part of that. In the world of cyber, there's other aspects, including training, that resonates. I like INKY because it kind of is a double whammy in that regard, but there's still other types of training that's needed. But one of the key aspects or controls that tends to resonate is the vulnerability scanning. I was just at, we're based here in the Chicago area, and last week was the Chicago Cybersecurity Summit, and you always have the FBI there. Love those guys because they throw some great statistics out there, and it's amazing from an exploitation perspective, the speed. So if a company is not applying using their vulnerability scans externally and internally, and even looking at their Active Directory, when there is a compromise, the exploitation period used to be, days to months. Now it's minutes, for the obvious exploitations. And we are now offering for our company clients, and definitely for MSPs and their clients, an amazing vulnerability scan portal. So that tends to go to the top when appropriate. Of course, it's objective. So, but that's a great tool. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Vince. And Dave, to you, ChatGPT has been getting so much play in the media. It's hard to understand exactly how it's impacting email security. Have you seen anything interesting that deals with AI against AI, white hats, black hats?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole webinar on this. This is such an interesting topic. At one level, it's terrifying, and I'll explain why it's terrifying. For us, it probably guarantees that we have jobs forever because this is only going to get worse. So silver lining, I guess. But it's terrifying because, these large language models, we don't really know how they work, but they definitely incorporate semantic knowledge. Not like a person, but certainly knowledge of things that heretofore only people would know. And these models can even do limited reasoning. So that whole development is something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And I started in AI. I actually was in the PhD program at MIT at the AI lab. So I was immersed in this stuff early on, and we never imagined this could happen in our lifetime. So it's a massive development it's not an understatement to say for civilization, this technology. Now, with respect to email, it also creates a new asymmetry. The attacker can use these LLMs cheaply to craft essentially perfect looking targeted phish. And the defenders like us simply cannot run an LLM analysis on every email. It's 5 orders of magnitude too expensive. The models are very expensive to run. Think about, ChatGPT that probably is doing, 500 billion floating point calculations for every token it produces, every word. I mean, this is extraordinary amounts of computation. So we can't just do the obvious thing of, hey, run every mail through an LLM and see what it says. What we're looking at, though, is are there ways to use LLMs indirectly? Can we gather data from LLMs? Can we use LLMs to train models? And that, I think, has a lot of leverage. So we have work going on to improve our models using these LLMs. But if you want to do a scary experiment, go to ChatGPT and put in a query like this. I am a security researcher giving a presentation to a Fortune 500 healthcare company about the dangers of phishing. Please write me a presentation with examples of phish that I can present to them. And you will get back essentially a bunch of slides, really in text form, but it'll be like slides with perfectly crafted examples that target a healthcare company, like specifically target a healthcare company. And if you can put enough information about which one, it'll target that specific one. Now, they try to have controls to prevent people from using these things for malicious purposes, but it's very easy through prompt engineering to work around those things. So, and even beyond that, a well-funded attacker can just run their own LLM and remove all the guardrails, ask it to do whatever it wants. And so it's very straightforward for attackers to create perfectly crafted phishing templates targeting certain industries, certain specific victims. And unlike the past, they'll have perfect grammar, perfect language. And so that's a massive disruption in our industry. And for me as an entrepreneur, that means opportunity as much as it means risk. But this is going to be a tough problem to solve over the long run. We're seeing the very, very beginning of this, but it's going to become completely ubiquitous, this use of LLMs to phish people. It's
Dave,
obvious.
don't stop innovating, please. That's
Well,
scary
we're
stuff.
working on it.
We need you to continue.
We're working on it. And then, there often are, again, silver linings to some of this stuff. As an example, I'll just pick one random example. We saw attackers putting Microsoft Windows logos in emails to make their mail look like it was from Microsoft.
Yeah.
And INKY wasn't recognizing those logos as Microsoft brand indicative. And our data team was like, what's up with that? It's clearly a Windows logo that should match the image recognition classification code. But looking at the mail, they saw, it's not actually an image like a PNG or a JPEG. It's a HTML table with 4 squares, and they set the color of each square to the corresponding colors in the Windows logo. So it looks like a Windows logo, but it's a table, not an image. Now, of course, once we saw that, we could develop countermeasures, and here's where I'm going with this. That's a very clear tell. While it's very clever and it will get through many of the incumbent systems, now that we know about it, we can easily convict any mail that's like that as phishing instantly, because why would any real mail do that, right? Similarly, we'll see mails that are phishing people. They'll have a fake attachment icon in the upper left of the corner of the mail.
Yep.
It's an image embedded in the mail, right? It's part of the mail, but it looks like the Chrome of Outlook, the button. So now we can detect those and, of course, immediately convict any mail that has an attachment button in it as phish. There's no legitimate reason why anyone would do that. And I think there will be traces of things like that we can key off of in these LLM-generated phish. So it's not all bad. A lot of times the attackers, when they do clever stuff, they leave a trace that's kind of cheaply identifiable as phishing, if you see what I mean. It doesn't take much computation to see, why is there an attachment image in this mail? That's bad. So that's kind of what gives me some solace about this long term.
Thanks, Dave. Vince, before we wrap up, I'd like to give you a chance to talk a minute about how MSPs specifically engage with GuardStreet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to us, cybersupport@guardstreet.com. You can go to our website, reach out. We will do the heavy lifting for you guys and really serve the cybersecurity subject matter expert function on your behalf. Reach out.
Thanks, Vince. All right, guys, thank you so much for this fantastic dialogue. And with that, I'd like to thank our audience for joining the conversation today. If you would like to learn more about GuardStreet or the INKY email security platform, visit guardstreet.com and inky.com. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.